Okay, so in this video, I'm just going to go over how I've used acute to chronic work to rest ratio in Google Sheets and how I've calculated it. In this scenario, I actually was just using it as a bit of experiment and looking whether it was manageable to do it with volume load, particularly just looking at this is actually a CrossFit athlete. So we're just looking at different ways that you might be able to quantify what they're doing. I've actually got some other stuff on how to quantify Metcons, but this is more just looking at that AC work ratio. And then I just thought it'd be a good opportunity to share how to calculate it and how I've used it, some of the problems I've had with it, and some of the questions that it has brought up. So essentially, this is my main data pool. The important ones to look at here are the date column and the volume load column. So what I've got here is nice and simple. The date, the exercise that performed, the reps, the weight, and that's how I've calculated the volume load. So it's just nice and simple, sets times reps times weight. So what this does is this pulls through onto a data sheet. So I've got a few simple columns. So the important thing with acute chronic ratio is that you need to account for days off. They just can't be nothing. They have to account for something, because if your volume load on your day off is 0, that needs to be in there. So I can't just have the dates that I've trained. I need to have every single date there. So all I did was simply select the first date of training and then put +1. Nice and simple. I then calculated the daily volume loads. I've done this as a sum. So sum ifs. So the sum that I am looking for is AH, and that column there is my volume load. So I'm a sum of all the volume load if column A, which is the date on the training tab, matches column A or cell A2 here. Okay, so that gives us 5,041 arbitrary units, or kilograms actually. So if I go back, I can see that on the 27th, I did these exercises. I've used a score of 1 for body weight, just playing around in this example. And I can see that these are my volume loads, and that is my sum, 5,041. So that's nice and clearly seen there. On the 30th, 3,400, and another one on the 1st. You can see very sporadic here. And these zeros are important, like I say, because if I haven't trained on that day, it's important that I specify that my load is 0. Okay. So then what I've done is I've worked out the acute training load. So I've got that at the moment set to 7 days for the acute and 28 for the chronic. So what I've used here in this formula, this is where it gets a bit more confusing. I'm going to do the sum, and this I'm going to add together everything where the daily volume is included. So that's what I'm actually adding up, the daily volume. But I'm only going to add up those data points if the date is less than or equal to today's date. Okay, so that's column A. The date is less than or equal to today's date. And the date is more than today's date minus 7. That's the important bit here. So the date is more than today's date minus 7. So that encapsulates everything from today and backwards 7 days. I've then just repeated that formula, obviously, for each day. So you can see here, nothing before this, 5,041 add 0, so it's the same. And then we've got our second day. So if I click on those two, we know that the sum's 8,448. Perfect, that's there. Then on this third day, where I've trained again, I now have 3 data points, and it's 14,000. Now, as you can see here, it goes back down to 9,100, and that is because the 7 days prior, so today 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay, it now no longer includes that first data point. If I change this to 8 days, depending how fast the internet is, you can see it now goes, and that's another day until I don't hit that point. So that's where it's important that you make a decision on how your program works, how your periodization works, to decide what your acute versus your chronic is. So we've got daily volume load, acute volume, and then we've got chronic volume. So chronic volume is exactly the same, except we are adding up the acute load, okay, if the date meets today or less than today, and the date is also more than today minus 28. Okay, so we're starting to add up that loading. Okay, sorry, the average, not the sum. So the chronic is the average. So we look at the average of the acute load. Sorry, I said that really bad, confused myself. Look at the average of the acute load if the date is today or less than 28. Okay, and then all we've simply done is done the acute divided by the chronic. So what I would say is that A, it's not perfect, particularly with volume load, because what do you do with body weight? What do you do with like cardio machines or cardiovascular work, endurance work? There's no mechanical work being put into account. This could be done with RPE. You could do it on certain GPS metrics or other performance metrics. It's up to you, I would say, to have a play and whether you find it useful. So I actually didn't continue this because I felt it wasn't a very good way of assessing the fatigue levels. The other important thing is to remember, so I've included, so on this acute, obviously I've included today and anything more than 7 days ago. So that is today and 6 days prior. Now that was because I would normally assess where I was at the end of the day. So I wanted to take in today's volume into account, look at my acute chronic work rest ratio, so then I could plan or adjust my session there. Now, some people I have seen in the past don't include the current days because they look at in the morning and they want to assess the previous 7 days. Okay, and so they're looking at all days behind today. Okay, if that makes sense. And all that would simply be a case of is in the acute, you would have is less than today and more than or equal to 7 days prior. So you just swap out where that equal sign goes. Okay. As I say, mine was just due to the fact of when I looked at the data. And that's one of the things I think is often hard to understand in a lot of the videos. It doesn't say whether you include the day that you've done or not. Again, for me personally, and some people won't like it that I say this, I think it depends on how you're looking at data and when you're interpreting the data. So yeah, daily volume, acute, or the sum of the acute, the average of that acute data there, and then we just do the acute divided by the chronic. Then I also added in a low threshold and a high threshold. So when I plot that on a chart, I can see if I was above or below. And if I go into it, you'll see, admittedly, I didn't take all those other dates out as well, that there was so many fluctuations in it. And because I wasn't consistently training, it was hard to get an actual handle and tell on what it was telling me. And then there were some days where I might come back in and there'd be lots of body weight and it wouldn't make a big dent when in fact the fatigue was quite high. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of idea of acute chronic work ratio, how it can be calculated, how you can use it, and some of the issues around it. I know there's other research out there which has suggested it's not such a good measure, but I know there's a lot of people that still would like to do it. Any comments, questions, if you've done anything differently, if you've had a better experience in the past where you've used it, or something where you think actually, look, you've got this a bit wrong, there's a tweak you can make here or there, please just pop it in the comments and let me know.